Hello everyone and welcome back to the tournament that we mentioned that we will revisit when we get the time. It is the second Piatigorsky Cup of 1966 and we're going to cover some games from the perspective of both Bobby Fischer and Boris Pasky. And if you guys have maybe a favorite from this tournament that was not played by either of them, I'm also very open to covering that as well. And this is a game that probably you haven't seen, and it's, tremendous work. It's such a beautiful game that I think it needs to be shown. Features a legendary Serbian grandmaster, Borislav Ivkov, or Bora Ivkov. We've covered him quite a few times on the channel. I will even put some links in the description below if you guys want to check it out. It's a very nice game from Santiago from 1959 where he defeated Bobby Fischer, and also they will meet quite a few times after that. For example, in the Palma de Mallorca Interzonal Tournament, that is legendary, where Fischer just crushed everyone. I will also include that if you want to check it out. But yeah, this was played in round 3. Fischer had a sort of a calm start to the tournament. He drew against Križevci and Portiš, whereas Ivkov defeated Larsen in round 1 and he lost to Nairov in round 2. So, okay, both doing very well, both have a point. They would very much like to beat, the other guy. So yeah, let's check it out. Going into this game, Fischer never actually defeated Ivkov. He played him 5 times, and Ivkov won 2 times, and 3 of those times was a draw. So yeah, not great for Bobby. So let's see what happens in this one. Ivkov with white opens with pawn to d4, and Bobby, as usual, goes for his knight to f6, and his moves will be pretty much standard, as he does this against any d4 opening. We have knight to f3, pawn to g6, and now pawn to g3, mixing it up a little bit, but Fischer sticks to his setup. Bishop to g7, we have bishop to g2, and castles kingside. We have castles kingside and pawn to d6, knight to c3. This is a bit of a odd move, as you are expecting pawn to c4 or pawn to b3 here, but Ivkov goes knight to c3. By doing that, he's preparing to meet knight c6 with the immediate pawn to d5, but also he gains control over the e4 square, so e4 might also be an idea. So Fischer wastes a move. He plays pawn to d5, as he did have a pawn on d6, and now he wastes another one to get it to d5, but it is the best way to continue, and today it's considered the top refutation sort of this knight to c3 idea. But he does give Borislav the e5 square, so Bora goes knight to e5 and pawn to c6. Now the d5 pawn needs to be defended, and c6 does just that. We have pawn to e4, Bora strikes in the center, and there are some games in the database where captures and captures was played, but only after this game. But here we have bishop to e6, and it is now, as of move 8, that this position has never been reached again. So Fischer needs to figure out what to do with the light square bishop, as for the moment it's not doing that great of a job. E captures on d5 by Bora, and c captures on d5. We have knight to e2, preparing to push the c pawn, knight to c6, and knight to f4, putting more pressure on Fischer's bishop. Fischer goes bishop to f5, and pawn to c3, as you don't want to see some knight to b4 trickery. Bishop to e4, Fischer somehow weasels his way all the way to e4, tries to trade off Bora's strong light square bishop, and the question is, do you play f3 or not? You could, then maybe you push g4 as well, you could push the bishop all the way back, but you haven't really accomplished anything, and you've ruined your pawn structure here on the king side, so maybe it's pushing it a bit too far. Bora goes bishop to h3 instead, and Fischer goes queen to c7. He develops the queen and prepares to get the rooks into the game. And now Bora could continue active piece development, but he goes knight f to d3. His plan most likely is to trade the knight for the knight on c6 and get this knight to e5. And Fischer says, nope, not happening, plays bishop captures on d3, knight captures on d3, and just plays pawn to e6. So he gets rid of his weak light square bishop and just completes his setup, puts all of his pawns on light squares and a dark square bishop to complement them in between. That is how chess should be played. And of course you couldn't capture with the queen on d3. Sorry if I didn't mention that. If you capture with the queen, then obviously Fischer just wins a pawn here. That's not happening. So after bishop captures, knight captures on d3, and now pawn to e6 and bishop to f4. Okay, Bora continues development. Queen to d8, and now rook to e1. Okay, nicely developing pieces. He does have the bishop pair, so if the position opens up, Bora will definitely have the advantage. We have rook to e8 and bishop back to g2. Knight to d7. Fischer now controls the center very nicely here, also controls the knight on d3, and he might have some future ideas depending on what Bora plays. Maybe e5 or f6, e5 is an option, but more likely it is not, and he will just need to advance the pawns on the queen side. So pawn to h4, pawn to h5, and bishop to f3. We have pawn to b5, preparing pawn to a5 and pawn to b4, and pawn to a3, pawn to a5, and queen to e2, developing the queen finally and connecting the rooks. And interestingly, Fischer does not go for b4 here. Fischer first prepares it with rook to c8, and Bora does not counter with pawn to b4, as both should have played pawn to b4. Instead, he goes for bishop to d6, and this is not the best move, because Fischer counters it very elegantly. He plays queen to b6, and now, with the queen sort of x-raying the bishop on d6, b4 is no longer an option for Bora. If he goes b4, now just knight captures on d4, and that's a problem. You lose a pawn, and very likely the game. So Bora played bishop to e5. Bishop to f4 would have been the safer choice, simply allowing b4 captures. Fischer will get a rook on a8, and okay, the game continues. You give Fischer a little, but bishop to e5 is it's not a losing move or anything, but it just allows Fischer to be very, very annoying and to find resources. And there is no one better than Fischer at finding, resources where there seem to be none. Fischer was some 22 years old here, maybe 22, 23, and Bora is some 10 years older. He was 32. So, both fairly young, both eager to fight. We have knight d captures on e5. We have knight captures on e5, knight captures, and pawn captures. This sort of makes Fischer's bishop not the star piece of the game, but it can go to f8. Maybe you can remaneuver it to c5. Maybe it goes to h6. Maybe it will be useful there. And probably Bora will move the bishop from f3, play king g2, play pawn to f4. So it's a nice position for both of them. But Fischer does get this annoying b4 move in. Okay, a captures, we have a captures on b4 and queen to e3, offering a queen trade. And while Fischer could play something like queen b8, put more pressure on e5 and continue with the pressure along the b and c file, he's very, very confident in his position and the isolated c-pawn that he will create. So, okay, sorry, now that queen captures on e3 was played, rook captures, and the simple b captures on c3. Now, the rook has to remain on e3 to defend the pawn. B captures, and now rook to c5. And this is why Fischer traded queens and why he is very confident about his position. The pawn on c3, the isolated pawn, is on a dark square. Fischer will attack it twice with the rooks, and of course Bora will defend it twice with his rooks, either via rook c1 or rook to a3. The problem is Bora has a light square bishop, and Fischer's dark square bishop can easily go, let's say, all the way to a5 and put more pressure on the c3 pawn. So all in all, Fischer will win this pawn. So let's see how Bora continues. He plays bishop to e2, rook e to c8. Attacking, we have rook to a3 defending, and now bishop to f8. Fischer, of course, continues with the plan of bringing the bishop to a5, and he wants to win that c3 pawn, which will create the passed d pawn. Whether you can push it all the way to a victory or not, it's very hard winning an extra pawn against bishops of opposite color, but the pawn on f4 is also weak unless white can find the right moment to execute pawn to f4. Interestingly, Fischer could have maybe played bishop to h6 here. Maybe if the rook moves, maybe you can immediately go after the pawn, but this sort of gives an incentive to white to play f4 right away, and this strengthens the e5 pawn. So Fischer goes bishop to f8, and now we have rook to b3. Now with the bishop on f8, pawn to f4 would be a terrible blunder, because look at this, both the rooks and the king are on dark squares, and if you play pawn to f4 here, a simple, nudge of the rook, and okay, this rook is hanging. Once this rook moves, bishop to c5, and you win the game. Simple as that. So Bora, of course, has to start moving things away from dark squares. He plays rook to b3. We have bishop to e7, and now king to g2. Okay. Now they're on light squares, bishop to d8. Fischer continues with his plan of bringing the bishop over to a5 and bishop to a6. Bora can no longer wait idly and, just see what happens, because that c3 pawn will fall. Fischer plays rook to a8, and now probably best way to continue is just to give up the c3 pawn. Something like bishop to f1. Okay, Fischer will attack it. You will play something like rook to b5. It will probably get traded off. Captures, rook to c8. You give up the pawn and you fight for a draw. But Bora wanted more. He tried to play actively. He played rook to f3. And his idea is, of course, a very interesting one. If Fischer captures the bishop on a6, Bora simply plays rook to b8. He attacks the bishop, and, you know, it's gonna be a draw. And if Fischer is careless, let's say he plays something like rook 8 to c6, now he will even play rook captures with check, king g7, rook d7, and now Bora is even winning the game. However, after this rook to f3 move has been played, Fischer has a winning position, but you have to be very, very smart about it. I did show you what was the plan if Fischer captures the bishop, so that should be at least a little bit helpful to you guys. But, you know, just in case it's not, feel free to pause the video and find the move that Fischer found while I give you a couple of seconds. So, for those of you who were able to do it, congratulations on finding this incredible maneuver. And for those of you who just want to enjoy the show, it is bishop to c7. The only move that wins the game for Fischer, because now you maintain all the threats while eliminating all of your opponent's threats. As this is still a threat, this is no longer a threat, and the pawn on e5 is weak, and Bora cannot simply handle all of that. Probably best is to play something like bishop to b7, and then after rook a7 attacking the bishop, you go rook e3 to defend the e5 pawn. But then, okay, this rook is tied here. Also, the rooks have to defend the pawn. Fischer will simply start improving the position of his king, move the bishop, get the king over to c7, and, you know, little by little, again, gain sort of either a winning advantage or one where you have to play an engine-perfect game not to lose. But Bora played rook to b5, and now Fischer's position is again winning, but only if you play the correct idea. Have at it, while I give you a couple of seconds. The move in question is rook to c4. Removing the possibility of a rook trade, the bishop on a6 is still hanging and the pawn on e5 is still hanging, and there's just no way to handle all of that. Bora played bishop to b7, but Fischer just went to rook to a3, and now Bora will maintain the bishop. He will not lose it, but his pieces are now on bad squares, and Fischer will win the c3 pawn and then slowly but surely the e5 pawn as well. Because you had to see it, you know, all the way from that start of an endgame that the pawn on c3 will fall and the pawn on e5 is weak, and if Bora does not play the correct moves, the e5 pawn will fall as well. Rook to e3, defending on e5, and now Fischer just plays king g7, improving the position a little bit before capturing on c3, bishop to c8, and rook a captures on c3. Okay, avoiding the rook trade, still possible to maybe defend. Fischer goes rook to c2, and you know now what's coming. Rook to a2 is coming, rook to c2 is coming, and unfortunately for Bora, all of his pawns are on dark squares, so that bishop will also be attacking the f2 square, and there's not much to do here. Bora played bishop to d7, but he was also in this position on move 42 that Borislav Ivkov resigned the game, as there is nothing more to be done here. The way you would continue this is obviously you double up on the second rank, and not a lot for Bora to do. He could play something like rook b7, you're going to double up here, and now you have to move the rook away to defend the pawn, and you have to leave the e5 pawn defenseless. Rook to f1. Fischer will, it's still a very good position to make a blunder. Like if you capture the pawn right away, bishop captures on e6, the f pawn is pinned, and again it's a draw. But of course Fischer would not make this mistake. More likely than not, he would just move the king a little bit, and next there is no move here for white. You could just waste moves with king f3, bishop captures on e5 comes, then you move the bishop, the king back, and now you have two extra pawns, and of course with two extra pawns it's an easily winning game. So yeah, 2 draws to start the tournament, and then a win with the black pieces in this spectacular showing by 22-year-old Bobby Fischer. Really, you know, one maybe not even a mistake. It was a series of moves that only together form a mistake, and Fischer was able to take advantage of that. That's how strong Bobby Fischer was. But yeah, brilliant game. And like I said, we're going to cover one game Fischer, one game Spassky, and then till we reach the end of the tournament and that famous game that I still haven't covered, that basically is amongst the others that decided the tournament. But yeah, crazy stuff. And like I mentioned at the beginning of the video, going into this game, Ivkov defeated Fischer twice, and 3 times their games ended in a draw. But after this game, after Fischer winning this one, Fischer never lost a game to Ivkov again. The next 5 games they played, so they played 10 games altogether, but the next 5 games they played, Fischer won 4, and 1 game was a draw. So yeah, very nicely done by Fischer. If you haven't seen the 2 games that I've mentioned, will be the 2 games in the description below, and I will also put them here so you can, click on them. So check them out. Really, really nice games. Would be a shame if you miss them. So yeah, I hope you guys enjoyed it. We'll be covering the second Piatigorsky Cup when I manage the time, and when there's something active happening in the chess world, we're gonna cover that. And also, if you guys have any suggestions, do suggest. The hashtag suggestion is very much a thing. So yeah, hope you guys enjoyed it. I would like to thank Priscilla Woodley, Gerhard Homer, David Kasparian, Ferald Gerald, and Mike Manson for your contribution to my channel. Thank you a lot. I really appreciate it. As usual, you can check 2 of my previous videos here. Thank you for watching, and I will see you soon, continuing to check up on your wonderful suggestions and whatever else happens in the chess world. Thank you all. I will see you soon, and have an excellent rest of your day.